Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 2021 Clean Energy for All wrap-up call. My name is Sarah Corcoran. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Conservation Program Manager for the Pennsylvania chapter of the Sierra Club. And I work with all of the lovely people that will be discussing campaign wins and some volunteer actions that can be done for 2022. So I am going to go over some community agreements before we get started. We're going to try to limit jargon and industry language as much as we can during our conversation. It can be a little bit hard when we're talking about some of the dirty fuels related issues, but we will do our very best. And if there's anything that we say that anyone doesn't understand, just flag it and in the chat, and we'll make sure to elaborate. Could you please make sure that unless you are speaking, that you remain muted during our presentation. And if you do come off mute in the Q&A portion of our presentation, just introduce yourself before you speak. So that way we know who's talking. Some folks are joining in via phone, so they won't have the opportunity to see your face if you are speaking. And then also you can use the stack option to talk. If there's a lot of folks who want to say something towards the end, just write the word stack in the chat box and we'll know that you'll want to speak. You can also use the raise hand function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And when we do speak later on, and this goes for us as presenters as well, it's okay to be raggedy. None of us are perfect. So things might not always come out the way that we expect them to, but that's okay. We're all human beings. We're all doing the best that we can. So for this evening, we're going to do a quick tech overview. I kind of talked a little bit about that already, but we'll go into it a little bit more for those of you who may not be familiar with Zoom. Then we're going to go into campaign updates and goals and how you can get involved with the clean energy and dirty energy work that we have going on here in the state. So for those of you who may not know, at the bottom of the screen is your best friend when you're on a Zoom call. You can mute and unmute yourself, start your video or turn off your video. A reminder, we are recording, so if you don't want your video shown, you can turn off your video. I made that mention earlier, but just to reiterate. And then the little bubble with the 3 dots is your chat button. You can utilize that to say hello, say where you're coming in from. If you have any questions for us, chat is a great function to have as well. If you would like to, and I'm going to do this right now on my own screen, if you click next to your name, you can rename yourself to show your pronouns. So that way we can refer to you the way that you like to be spoken about. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to add she, her pronouns next to my name. So when you're looking at the attendance list, you can tell what my pronouns are. And if you are using, sometimes like it'll come in as like Bob's iPhone or something along those lines, you can rename yourself as well there, so that way everyone knows who you are. So if you have, like I said, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat and we'll get started from there. If you'd like to, go ahead and put your name in the chat too, so we know where you're from. Now, the Clean Energy for All campaign that we have here in Pennsylvania is a little bit special. We wanted to break down barriers between the different facets of the energy work that we do here in PA. So the dirty fuels work, dealing with pipeline build out and fracking infrastructure is not completely separate, from the clean energy work and the clean transportation work that we're trying to fight for within the state. You can't have one without the other. So we've been really trying to align all of our work within the state under this Clean Energy for All banner, which will allow us to be able to have one big voice when it comes to energy work within the state. And with that, I am going to pass it off to talk about 2021 victories to Kelsey Cripps.
Hi, y'all. Can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. I just wanted to check. This is my first time using a set of earbuds, so thanks for that. Hi, y'all. Kelsey Cripps. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I am the senior campaign representative with the Beyond Dirty Fuels campaign, talking about a couple of really cool wins from the last year in the state and really cool things that have been going on related to dirty fuels. The first is that fracking was banned in the Delaware River Basin Commission. Woo-hoo! In the next couple of days, you will probably see, if you live in the Delaware River Basin, an action alert coming to your emails because there are some upcoming rules that we would like to make some good comments on. There's some ways that there are some exclusions to this frack ban, but at the same time, this was still a really important step made last February, almost a year ago. So love that for our first start of the anniversary of what happened last year. Another important cancellation and or big project that we got to see, well, a big project that we got to see canceled was the Penn East Pipeline project. This is, yeah, woohoo, as Sarah was doing, like the trucker, like honk kind of thing. That's exactly how it feels. This pipeline is officially canceled by investment partners, despite a ruling in favor of the company that happened at the Supreme Court. That does affect some of the pipelines that we're working on, but this is a really big cancellation and a really great win for the state of Pennsylvania and the state of New Jersey. And then we saw the Attorney General file some criminal charges over the last year, starting with Mariner East, but there have been a couple more criminal charges filed since then. And it's just a nice and refreshing aspect of this work when we start seeing the energy companies and the pipeline companies that have been wreaking havoc on our land and in our homes being held responsible. So these are ongoing processes, but at the same time, they were filed and that process is still ongoing. So I think those cover a few highlights of mine, Sarah. I think taking it over to Tom, I believe, or Randy.
Nope, it's Tom's next.
I'm taking this one. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Schuster. I'm the Clean Energy Program Director for the chapter. I'm based in Johnstown. Before I was with the chapter, I was working with the Beyond Coal campaign, and I still am, but just not with 100% of my time. And Randy and I have worked together on this issue for a while, going back to 2015 is when the campaign started. Seems like a very long time ago. But we finally got the Cheswick Power Plant in northeastern Allegheny County to retire. We were, over the years, working on trying to reduce the permitted air pollution levels required to operate properly its pollution control equipment. We were involved in a lawsuit over discharges into the Allegheny River, and finally wore them down. So they're going to be shutting that plant down in April. That is one of the few remaining conventional coal-fired power plants in Pennsylvania. There are only there's only actually, now that Cheswick has announced retirement, two other large ones in Western Pennsylvania have announced retirement. There's only one left, and that one is kind of teetering on the edge. That's Homer City, that was in the news today, that may be announcing retirement soon. So we will soon be engaging in a organizing process with the community to try to influence what comes next on that property. Trying to make sure that the site is redeveloped into something that is more appropriate for a neighborhood setting. Clean energy is a possibility on that site, apparently, which would be nice, but there are other, I think, more sustainable types of uses for that land. So stay tuned on that. Next slide. All right, and somewhat related to this, potentially, is that we saw the rulemaking to join Pennsylvania into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative approved. This final approval in the regulatory step happened in early September. Somewhat ironically, on the same day that the remnants of the hurricane passed through and caused so many flooding issues, some tornadoes throughout the state, we did barely pass this climate action by a score of or a vote of 3-2 in the Independent Regulatory Review Commission. This is important because it's the first time we will ever regulate carbon dioxide emissions from the power sector, or actually really any sector. This will ratchet down emissions in the power sector by 30% over the next 8 years. Obviously, that's not fast enough, but it is one of the few options that's on the table that can be done administratively without legislative action. It is expected to accelerate the retirement of the remaining coal plants and basically stop a whole bunch of proposed new gas plants from getting built, and also generate rather large sums of money for reinvestment in clean energy efficiency and other measures to prevent air pollution through the sale of allowances. So we are still, and I will get to this in a later slide. Someone mentioned in the chat some bills in the legislature that are attempting to thwart this. There's kind of a complicated ecosystem of these bills that I can talk about a little bit when we get to that slide. So we're not out of the woods yet. This hasn't gone into force yet. It's expected to in April. Next slide. All right. So this is the federal infrastructure bill. I wouldn't exactly call it a victory, but it is, I think, an important development. Obviously, we wanted to get the broader climate investments from Build Back Better passed, and we're still working on trying to get elements of that bill passed. But there are some major game-changing investments for the climate in the infrastructure bill that passed in the fall. And I'm naming a few of them here. There's a few more that will be important, but I think these are probably the most important for Pennsylvania. Lots of investments in transportation electrification. That's primarily charging infrastructure, as well as electrification funds for transit buses and school buses and ports. There's a bunch of money to expand the federal weatherization assistance program. And hopefully, in order to get that to work and be delivered in a timely manner, hopefully we'll be able to use some of that funding for job training for people to actually perform the work. And then, very importantly for Pennsylvania, there's a lot of money available for well plugging. We have probably hundreds of thousands of abandoned wells in Pennsylvania, many of which are emitting methane, which Kelsey will get into in a bit. And abandoned mine land reclamation. We have many thousands of acres of land that are impacted negatively by mines that were not properly cleaned up, and are right now one of our primary modes of addressing that issue is by burning the waste coal. And so this will give us some better options in terms of remediating that land. Next slide. Okay, so then we're going to transition now into some campaigns that we launched in 2021 that are still ongoing that we have not scored a victory in yet, but hopefully with your help, we will. And I'll start this and then turn it over to Kelsey when the time comes. Next slide. All right, so the first one is a zero emission vehicle sales requirement. So this is also known as advanced clean cars. This is a provision in the Federal Clean Air Act that allows us to choose between enforcing federal standards for vehicle emissions or the California standards, because California has an exemption under the Clean Air Act. California, in its standards, actually requires a certain percentage of vehicles be electrified. And we are in the process right now of adopting California standards, at least for the short term. There is a kind of a wonky timing issue right now that is giving DEP some pause. I won't get into the specifics on that, but we may be in a situation soon where we have to convince them to move forward more quickly than they are, rather than waiting to see what happens in California. But the purpose of this is to make sure that we actually have electric vehicles available for purchase in Pennsylvania, because right now, the manufacturers send most of their models to other states that have already adopted the California standards. So it becomes really kind of a problem for folks who want to buy electric vehicles but can't. So we will be working on that pretty extensively this year. Next slide. And we are transitioning into the dirty field stuff. So I will kick it over to Kelsey.
Thanks, Tom. An ongoing issue for us in the state of Pennsylvania is liquefied natural gas, or frack gas, as it should be known as. At the same time, we are dealing with this issue in PA from a variety of angles, since the Wyalusing liquefaction facility is being proposed in Bradford County. We're involved in 2 different legal cases there to hopefully prevent this facility from being built. But at the same time, we also are working on some of the important issues dealing with shipping this hazardous material via trains and truck down to Gibbstown, New Jersey for the export terminal that's located there. We've sent 241 petition signatures related to the special permit that the companies have to ship this by train. We're hoping to keep involved with that particular case. We've also been involved with sending some comments into the Biden administration to bring back a ban of transporting LNG by rail. And that will be ongoing, as we've heard the administration is looking at adopting new rules rather than a total ban. And so we'll be continuing to engage folks on this issue as we continue to see it trying to be proliferated on the eastern side of the state. So stay tuned for some of that work. We also filed a campaign to raise oil and gas bond amounts in the state of Pennsylvania last year. And this was a campaign launched early last fall, I think. My timelines are a little weird. COVID, I think, has made my brain just not be able to remember time properly, for sure. But at the same time, we partnered up with a few different environmental orgs in the state to file rulemaking petitions to raise oil and gas bonds in the state, similar to what Tom was talking about earlier, where we have hundreds of thousands of abandoned wells that have no owners, and the state is on the hook, as well as our taxpayer dollars are on the hook for that particular cleanup. We're getting some federal funds to do that work, which is great, from the bipartisan infrastructure plan. Coupled with that, the third phase of funding coming from the bipartisan infrastructure plan, the third phase of that for those plugging monies is states take a look at some of their regulatory options for addressing how wells become abandoned. They can also potentially receive more money, and bond amounts and raising financial assurances to prevent abandoning of wells is a piece of that. So if the state takes a look at their bond amounts, raises those to be what it actually costs to plug a well rather than having a very large gap, is what we see typically, we would be able to get some more money for the state as well. But we did launch this campaign. We did get an update today from the environmental, from DEP at the Environmental Quality Board meeting this morning. that the DEP needs more time to produce reports based off of our petitions that we filed. And so we will be starting to put some pressure on DEP to produce these reports in a timely manner, so they don't just kick this down the road and we don't see those reports based off of our petitions for some time. Starting to ramp up some of that pressure. And basically, if all happens that we want to happen for this campaign, we'll see a rulemaking start. But that does bring me, I believe this is the next slide, which brings me to a way to get involved for that campaign is upcoming. We have a letter to the editor workshop on March 9th, I believe at 7 p.m. It's a Wednesday. We'll be doing a whole workshop on sending in some letter to the editors to your local papers, kind of giving y'all the highlights of this particular work, and as well as putting some pressure on DEP and others to get these reports out and to take a serious look at this issue in the state. If you need more information, we have a website, but also I'm dropping in the chat the link to sign up for the bonding workshop. I think I'm transitioning again to someone else.
Yes, you are. And I will also share the link to sign up to anything that is discussed this evening in the follow-up email when I send out a copy of the recording and slide deck. Thank you, Kelsey. We will be turning the floor over to Randy for a little bit.
Hi, y'all. I'm Randy Francisco. I'm a senior organizing representative. I live up in Tynesta, Pennsylvania, Forest County, up near the Allegheny National Forest. But most of my career, I've worked out of Pittsburgh. I moved up here last year. So I work from the national perspective. I work closely with all the folks you've been hearing about. And so what I'm doing is working with a team of folks at the state level to work on several issues, but one of them is just looking at how we're building power. So a lot of what Tom was talking about with Reggie, a lot of our pushback on Reggie came out of the region on this map that this is pointing to. That's also where the last 3 conventional coal plants are at. So we're going to be working on building some power in that area. That's Indiana County, Cambria County, Armstrong County, that area. We're going to be doing some outings, some community events, partnering with local folks and organizations, and we'll be working on a lot of these issues that you're hearing about tonight: orphan and abandoned wells, fracking waste, transportation and building electrification, doing a lot of conversations in this area on Reggie when there's some places for us to engage there. And then we'll be looking at other local issues too that are important to other local organizations. And we can go to the next slide. And then I also work with a team of people on, Tom mentioned Build Back Better. We've worked this year, we did a lot on Build Back Better. And we're disappointed that it hasn't gotten across the finish line yet, but we're still working. These stars actually represent people on this team that I see a few of you on this call. So thank you for joining us here to hear about all of the stuff we're doing. But we're looking to build this team this year, looking at working on a lot of the issues that are important to the chapter, specifically Reggie, and anything else that comes up that's important. And we're still going to try to get Build Back Better or some form of it to the president's desk. This past year, we had lobby meetings with all but one, I think, of our Democratic congresspeople and Senator Casey in the state. We had several letters to the editor published all across the state, and really held our Democratic folks in line when it came to Build Back Better. We had nobody attempting to jump ship or anything like that as far as that went. So I feel we were successful in Pennsylvania. And we've had folks jumping in to help out, in West Virginia where they needed some help too. So that was good. This year we'll also be transitioning. As you all know, it's an important election year, I'm sure. So we'll be transitioning to help out candidates, and what that looks like, we're not sure yet, but we're going to be definitely getting involved in politics at the end of the year to make sure that we have 2 Democratic senators in Pennsylvania and keep our majority in the House as well. So thank you all. That's all I have to say, but thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Randy. And speaking of legislative actions, we're going to pop back over to Tom to talk about some of our legislative priorities that we'll be working on.
Sure. Thanks, Randy. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to run through a few things that we're working on here. There's actually a lot of bills. There's actually far too many to list and to go into here. But you'll see at the bottom of this slide, there is a handy legislative tracker that is on our website. And so you can look up bills, you can search by keyword, you can search by bill number, and you can find links to the bills and our positions on the bills there. I mentioned that in the chat, someone asked a question about bills related to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That's something that we have spent quite a bit of time on this year and will continue to have to fight. There's two sets of bills. One is a resolution that passed in the House and Senate and was vetoed by Governor Wolf that is part of the regulatory review process and is subject to a timeline that's known as SCRRR1. And there is that's been a point of controversy. It has enabled the Republicans in the legislature have reinterpreted, I would say misinterpreted, and there's a lawsuit related to this, the amount of time that they have to pass a resolution to object to a regulation that passes through the regulatory process. And they are applying that extended timeline to their deadline to try to override a veto as well. And while that the courts are reviewing the legal challenge to that, the body that's responsible for publishing new regulations, which is what officially makes them take effect, is deferring to the legislature's interpretation, unfortunately. Once that clock runs out, which will be in the end of March, the regulation will be published and will take effect at that point. So we're expecting that to happen in early April. And then we will be able to participate in the first auction of allowances in June. And that's when power plants that emit carbon dioxide will have to purchase those allowances 1 per ton and essentially be held accountable for their pollution. There's another set of bills, and this was the one that was alluded to in the chat, that does something similar but different in important ways. And that's House Bill 637 and Senate Bill 119. Both of those bills would not only prevent the RGGI regulation from becoming law, but they would prevent any regulation of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases from being promulgated by the DEP without legislative approval. And as long as the Republicans control at least one chamber in the legislature, that means it will never happen. So the only thing that's really standing between us and a complete inability to regulate greenhouse gases is a gubernatorial veto, if that bill passes. So interestingly, the Republicans who are sponsoring and pushing House Bill 637 have introduced and gotten adopted a amendment that will dedicate $250 million in unspent funds from the American Rescue Plan, which is one of the COVID relief packages, to issues related to climate. I say issues related to climate because they're not necessarily all climate solutions. Some of them are, spending for carbon carbon capture and sequestration for power plants, things that are unproven and are not things that Sierra Club supports. There is some money in there for things like worker transition in fossil fuel communities, which we would support as a standalone bill if it wasn't attached to something that would end the most important climate action that the state has ever taken. So we are expecting that to actually heat up relatively quickly. They may take that up as soon as March 21st. So expect to hear from us on that and be asked to contact your legislator and set them straight about what real climate action is and what short-term band-aid is. Other legislative priorities. There is a bill that is working through the House right now. It has already passed in the Senate that would prohibit local governments from essentially banning new gas connections for buildings. There are a lot of municipalities in other states that are working to adopt net zero building codes, which means new buildings have the ability to be carbon neutral through the adoption of renewable energy because they are 100% electric and utilize heat pumps for heating and cooling. This bill would prevent that from happening in Pennsylvania at the local level, which would be a major setback. Even though there are no municipalities that are currently planning on doing that, we think that the tide is turning and that will be something that they become interested in very soon. We are still, there's a couple of bills that we support, one of which we've been supporting for years, which is currently known as House Bill 1555, Community Solar, enabling people to sign up for a share of a solar array, which is good if you don't have access to a property where you can install solar panels yourself. It would allow what's called virtual net metering. So you would get a credit on your bill for solar generated at an offsite array as if it were located on your property. We do actually have some hope for that. It's a slim hope, but hope nonetheless. That the key provisions in this bill might be amended into another bill that has some support for other reasons from the utilities. That would be, I think, an acceptable compromise in order to enable community solar. So hopefully that will be something that develops in the next couple of months that we'll be updating you on. And then Senate Bill 15 is another RGGI bill that actually would improve the flexibility to invest the large amount of RGGI proceeds, allowance proceeds that we expect to flow, and would allow for particularly investments in environmental justice communities and communities that have to transition away from fossil fuels to a greater degree and a more flexible degree, and would probably, we think, not only be more just in itself, but also create more political resilience for RGGI, get more buy-in from people across the Commonwealth on it. It is not something that is really expected to move in the short term, but if RGGI goes into force and survives the expected legal challenges that we will be defending rigorously against, I think you'll start to see some of the Republicans who have been opposing RGGI and some of the moderate Democrats in the West that have been opposing RGGI to come to the table and start talking about whether or not Senate Bill 15 can be advanced. And then every year we have this issue where the budget is ripe for a whole bunch of riders that typically include tax breaks or regulatory breaks or subsidies for fossil fuels. So we're always on the lookout for that. This year we're hoping to get some increases in the budget for DEP and Department of Environmental Protection and Conservation and Natural Resources in order to in order for them to really be able to carry out their mission better than they have been, because they've been so strapped for staff and cash lately. Next slide. All right, and so I talked about that last slide for a while. There's obviously a lot on our plate in terms of legislation. And so we are constantly sending out alerts for people to contact our legislators on specific bills. It is very important that legislators hear from us on a regular basis. It's hard for us to keep up. We have people who do direct lobbying, but it's hard for us to keep up with fossil fuel interests who have a lot more money in that area than we do. But hearing from constituents matters. Phone calls matter, emails matter, letters to the editor are very important still. Even though you may think that fewer people read newspapers, you better believe that your legislators read the newspapers. But one of the things that we're really trying to do this year is to establish lobby teams in legislative districts across the state, similar to what Randy's been doing at the federal level, but to make sure that we have teams that are regularly contacting their state representatives, their state senators, on issues of interest, and really establishing relationships with these folks, to the point where, you know, you can get on a first name basis. Maybe you start texting your legislature. That's a thing, especially since we have so many people in the House, right? So I really encourage you to think about joining a local lobby team, or if you don't have a local lobby team, starting one up and recruiting people. I think that's probably the most important thing we can do to advance our priorities in Pennsylvania right now. Because right now, unfortunately, the legislature is bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. We need to push back against that. And I think, at least on the House side, the new legislative maps look a little promising. They look like there's going to be some more competitive districts, and I think people will be more interested in making their constituents happy. So next slide.
Before we get into the chapter conservation teams, we did have a question in the chat about how you would find out if you had a local lobby team near you.
Right. So there are not very many of them right now. So probably at this moment you don't have an active state lobby team. At the end of this presentation, there are email contacts. Jen Quinn is our legislative and political director. She is our primary lobbyist and will be coordinating the formation of the lobby teams. I will be assisting her, and we are also in the process of hiring a distributed organizer who will be working on that soon. But right now, the best thing to do is to write down Jen's email at the end of this presentation and let her know that you're interested. And she can help you figure out who your legislator is and what issues we are most concerned about with respect to that legislator. What do we think they're movable on? What do we think that they need to hear from you about?
All right, great. Move on then. All right, so I can speak a little bit about the chapter conservation teams. Last year, on a statewide level, 8 different conservation teams were established throughout the state. They're a way for folks to speak across groups on specific issues that are important to them. And 3 of the conservation teams that were established are energy related. There are other ones as well that deal with clean water and clean air that kind of connect with the energy related teams. but these are the three that we pulled out specifically: the clean energy team, the dirty energy team, and the clean transportation teams. And they all of the conservation teams last year participated in a summer webinar series. So those webinars can be found on our chapter YouTube page. I'll be happy to share them out when I share out the recording of this presentation. There was a community solar webinar. There was a discussion with the Safety 7 about Mariner East. And there was also a webinar for discussing restructuring of transit funding. They are in the process this year. The clean energy team actually has a webinar next week on utility scale energy storage, which I can share the registration link out to folks who may want to attend that one. That they're going to be focusing on RGGI support, fugitive methane emissions, the clean car rulemaking, transportation equity, all sorts of big picture things that are going to need volunteer support. These teams are completely volunteer run. And if you're interested in joining one of them, there's the link on the top of the page right there that you can use. I'll also be able to share out that link when I send out the recording. They usually either hold monthly or bi-monthly team calls that are open to anyone who wants to join at any time. And those meetings, you can find those on our chapter website. And yeah, so that's a quick once over of the conservation teams. Like I said, there are other conservation teams. So if you go to the link on the top of the screen there, you can see some of the other work that's happening as well. There's a public lands team, a zero waste team, all sorts of good initiatives that you can join in on. Now, we're going to open it up to questions. If you would like to come off mute and speak that way, you are more than welcome to. But you can also utilize the chat function. And I'm going to actually move to the next screen since that has all of the email addresses on it. So you can jot any of those down that you would like to. My contact information is on the top. Tom's is next. So if you have any question relating more on the clean energy or the RGGI side of things, please feel free to reach out to Tom. Jen Quinn, who's down towards the bottom of that list, is our political and legislative director, as Tom had mentioned earlier. You can email her to get added to her legislative updates. She sends out wonderful legislative update emails to everyone on her list. You can also talk with her about any of the lobby team discussions that you would like to talk to her about. Jim Wiley is he was the chapter chair. Now he is the conservation co-chair, and he can answer any questions about the conservation teams and any issues relating to Southeast Pennsylvania in particular, which is where he is located. Randy spoke about Build Back Better and more of the federal legislation and work happening in Western Pennsylvania. And Kelsey is going to be fielding any of the dirty fuels related questions, and she can get you connected with any sort of fracking infrastructure work that is happening within the state. And don't forget, also, I will share out the links when I send out the recording again, that there is the LTE workshop coming up on March 9th that Kelsey and I will be facilitating. And while it is focusing primarily on bonding and the bonding campaign, if you would like to just attend and learn more about how to write a letter to the editor in regards to any of the rest of the energy work that we're doing within the chapter, feel free to join in for that as well. So let's see, I have a few questions in the chat. Oh, and Randy mentioned in the chat that he'll be doing some trainings on lobbying in the coming months. So if you want to do a lobby training, we can make sure that you get that information as well. All right, so we have a solar related question for you, Tom. So who do we contact to explore the option of installing solar at our home?
That is a good question, and it's going to depend on where you live. I think there are some areas, particularly in the southeast, where there are a number of installers that you can readily look up. Out where I am, you have to go a little bit farther afield and almost go by word of mouth. So in Bellefonte, I know that there is a group of folks, volunteers in the Center County area, that have been working with a solar installer called Untitled. And we don't have any particular sort of endorsement list of companies that we've vetted or anything, but what I would recommend, and it's Untitled, ENVINITY, I think. Oh, okay, maybe it starts with an I. Thanks, Kelsey. But I can, if you shoot me an email, I can connect you with a couple of the folks in a couple of our volunteers in that area, where they can get you in contact with them and possibly other companies.
All right, I'm gonna run through the chat. We've got quite a few questions popping in. Let's see, there was a question relating to, I'm not quite sure, Larry, if we'll be able to answer this one for you, but the question was, to what extent is capitalism interfering with mitigating the effects of climate change? Whoever wants to fill that one.
I saw that. My short answer is all the ways. I think, in all seriousness, I think there's a theme to the work that we're doing related to energy and climate, and there's a couple of themes. One is addressing the market failure, right, that happens when polluters are able to socialize the cost of their pollution and privatize the profit, right, which is kind of a feature of capitalism. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to prevent that socialization of costs, and to make sure that if you are using the sky to dump your carbon dioxide in, you have to pay for that, and that levels the playing field with clean energy. Obviously, that's an imperfect solution, right? But it is, kind of within the political reality that we're living in. We think the best that we can do right now. That's one theme. I think the other is really focusing on equity and trying to make sure that marginalized communities that have historically borne the brunt of pollution and are expected to bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change, that's traditionally your communities of color, your lower income communities, that we're trying to lift up their voices and stand up for their interests in all of this, because otherwise our system allows them to continue to get the short end of the stick. So, but yeah, I mean, you're getting right to the core of it.
I can field the next two questions. I see your question, Tamala, about PFAS campaign. The best group to reach out to for that would be the Clean Water Conservation Team. I see your information there. I can connect you afterwards. And Pat, I'd be more than happy to provide the summary in writing for descriptions next to everyone's contact information when I send out the slides. So that should help out with figuring out who to contact based on your interest. The next question, if you have an incredibly bad set of local legislators, like Yaw, Whelan, and Fred Keller in Congress, is it worth your time attempting to lobby them, or are there more likely to be effective alternatives for putting time?
Yes,
Sure, I
that
can
is a
take
very
that
good
one.
question. Yeah. Why don't you? I have a perspective on that, but why don't you go first? Because
Yeah, I think
a federal angle there.
the short answer is yes. But it's as part of I mean, and the more local, the better. So your state reps, your state senators, or you're going to be able to form direct relationships with them. And you may not get a meeting with your congressman, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. The other thing is to think about, if you have a lobby team, they're lobbying, but there's also other tactics you can use, that the letters to the editor, getting your friends, and we have lists of folks that you can get to make, call them to ask them to make a phone call. So you're building, not just the relationship, but you're making sure that if they're not meeting with you, they're hearing from a lot of their constituents about and asking why, maybe something like that. So Tom, anything else you want to fill in there?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's all right. I think to your question, like there are certainly other things that you can put your energy into, right? A lot of these administrative rulemakings are important. So things like supporting the clean cars rule, right? I think that I think there's a couple options in terms of directly engaging legislators who are bad. Number one is trying to think of who they listen to that you might be able to get to, right? Like everyone listens to someone, right? And in the case of Gene Yaw, I mean, it's mostly the fracking industry, to be honest, but there are other there are likely other interests as well who you might have a bit more in common with. So that's one angle to try, is to try to figure out, like, okay, if I'm not the person he's most likely to listen to, maybe there's someone else who's reasonable that he does listen to. The other thing is some people who, some people who are bad on many of our issues can sometimes be decent on one or two of our issues, right? An example is my senator, Langerholk, who is against us on a lot of climate policies, but is pretty good on electric vehicles because he sees the future of transportation electrification and as really kind of an economic issue as opposed to a climate issue. He also happens to be the chair of the Transportation Committee. And so I think there's at least one issue that we can work with him on. And so I think that sometimes you have to get to know somebody a little bit, do your research and figure out, like, is there an angle that we might be able to make progress on?
All right. Before I do the next question, I just wanted to do a time check for folks. It is almost 8:30 at this point. If we get a slew of questions that come in, all of the presenters have agreed that they're okay with going over a little bit. If you have any further questions after we get off of our call tonight, I'll be following up with everyone. You all have my email address to start with, but you can email any of the folks on the screen as well, and we'll be happy to get back to you on that. The last question that I see in the chat right now is asking about if anyone has any idea on how to get folks to respond to written letters. They stated, I've written legislators asking specific questions. Any ideas on how to get them to provide answers?
Randy, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I know a lot of times it's they kind of give you talking points or tell you thank you for calling and I'll consider your thoughts without it or answering your question, and it looks like they didn't read your letter. So I don't really have a good answer for that. I would say that's part of that relationship building we're talking about. It's the more local you get with your state reps, state legislators, state senators, the more likely you are to get a real answer to your questions once you build a relationship with them or their staff too. I think it's important to realize that you're not just building a relationship with the person that's in office, but also building a relationship with members of their staff is just as important, I think, too. So those are the things I'd say to do. But like I said, it's not, those politicians know how to speak political language that thinks they're making you happy with their question, with not answering your question.
Yeah, my take on that is the best way to get a direct answer is to actually have an in-person meeting, right? And you're most likely to get that at their district office. And so I think it's good, especially when you're talking about state representatives, because there's 203 state representatives. The districts are like pretty small. I think it's like 60,000 people per district. And so it's relatively easy to be able to get an in-person meeting there. And to Randy's point about staff, what we've found is that frequently there are staff who are kind of gatekeepers of information for certain legislators, particularly people who are chairs of committees. And so, yeah, I can't stress enough the importance. Don't think that just because you're meeting with someone's staff that you're being blown off by that legislator. Sometimes if you convince the staff, you convince the legislator on a particular issue. If it's not something that is, especially if it's not something that is like a real like political hot button issue, if it's more of a kind of clean energy policy issue.
All right. I think that was the last question. Steve, I answered your last question there in the chat, so that is already taken care of. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording this evening. Thank you all for popping on and learning a little bit more about what we've been working on and how to get involved. And I hope you really enjoy the rest of your evening.